place on the world scale or in third world countries, and it's very likely that this debate takes place in the Western countries. But I'm just mentioning it quickly in case you would like to know.
Now, what my co-host Al just mentioned there about specifically the incarceration in countries like El Salvador having a greater effect than the death penalty itself, I agree. Of course, yeah, taking those criminals off the street is how you decrease the murder rate more so than the death penalty. But these are the more important side to debate in regards to the death penalty is more so the level of justice. This is a discussion about sentencing, and sentencing is around serving justice to the victim or deterrence or rehabilitation. Of course, the death penalty is no argument for rehabilitation, unless you're on about forgiveness, and even then that's not really an argument. But as well, with deterrence, there is some value on deterrence, because if you raise the consequences of said crime, it's surely sending a message to the general public that this crime is unacceptable and would be served. Like if we look specifically to the posting of the El Salvadoran government, there was this clip. You could call it a propaganda clip on these MS-13 gang members. These are individuals that have held the population of El Salvador hostage, and of course this horrible society and corrupt nation that has been subject to just awful gang culture. And this idea of rounding up gangs and serving them justice, we've got to think, is the death penalty just in this situation where you've got these gangs that are holding society hostage? How else are you going to get rid of them? These gangs are massive. They hold complete cities under their rule almost. And the only way I could feasibly see a government dealing with them in a permanent way is rounding them all up like animals, like the animals they are, and chucking them in prisons later to kill them. Because these gangs are enormous. The level of influence they have is enormous. It's only a matter of time until there's an attempt to break out. These people shouldn't have a chance at another go in life. These are evil people. And the fact is, we do have a gang problem in the UK in regards to county lines. They blackmail children into smuggling drugs into schools. They use kids as drug mules. They are rotten, and these people don't deserve to live. These should be cut out like the true tumour they are.
Okay, so 2 points mentioned by the proposition. First is deterrence, and second, that those people do not deserve to live. They terrorize the society. That's why it's the most effective way to get rid of them is by implementing the death penalty. So the first point on deterrence, and the main question here is the death penalty very effective at deterring potential criminals from committing serious crimes? And one can easily argue that death penalty does not. Firstly, there is a big lack of empirical evidence, and studies have failed to find significant correlation between the death penalty and reduced murder rates. But why is that? Can we dive a little bit deeper? Well, firstly, it's because most of the crimes committed are emotional and impulsive, right? They're committed in the heat of the moment, and offenders do not stop in the middle of their crime and think, well, maybe I can die, maybe I will get sentenced or anything like that. No, they don't think about that in the middle of the crime when they're committing it, and they do not carefully weigh the consequences when doing so. And secondly, well, criminals don't think about the severity of punishment. What they think about is the certainty. Why criminals commit the crimes that they do is because they're certain that they will get away from it. They're certain that they will not go to jail or have any consequences whatsoever. They do not take into account the severity of the punishment. And those are the three reasons why death penalty is not an effective way of deterrence. And also, one can argue that if we want to tackle the deterrence and reduce the crime rates overall, not for the most heinous crimes ever, but overall crimes. There are alternatives, forms of punishment, and alternative ways that you can handle this. First is the enhanced sentences. As was mentioned by the proposition, if you increase the severity of punishment for various crimes by increasing the length of the jail sentence that you get, by proposition's logic, you can say that potential offenders will be discouraged from committing certain crimes because a bigger portion of their life will be spent under bad conditions in the incarceration, right? Secondly, we have rehabilitation and restorative justice, something that is not heavily implemented in the majority of the Western countries, only in a few, but one can argue that for small crimes, the government should implement certain ways in which that you now can reintegrate those individuals back into the society as law-abiding citizens, right? But you should address the root of the cause of the criminal behavior, which is probably the lack of education, the lack of the opportunities to feed themselves and their families. And you can argue even more that the ex-convicts are very likely to commit the crimes again that people who have never done the crimes in the first place. And by providing those opportunities to ex-convicts, you're able to prevent those crimes from being committed again, right? And thirdly, you can implement more effective law enforcement. This means that better community policing and other initiatives that can significantly impact deterrence, not just relying solely on the punitive measures. So by increasing the chances of apprehension and conviction for criminals, the potential offenders may perceive a higher risk of being caught, thus deterring them from committing crimes, right? So these are the points on deterrence. A second is the point on that we should kill these gang members in Salvador, etc., right? So the main counter-argument that you can make for this is that there is a potential that among those who were put into the prison and on the death row is an innocent person, right? The proposition is telling us that those people who committed those crimes are animals and they do not deserve to live, and their life serves very little value, right? So when we're comparing like 100 of people that committed those heinous crimes, one can say that an innocent life is equal to those. And if we can preserve this innocent life, we will do whatever it takes into account in order to preserve such life, right? And one way of preserving it is by not having the death row. And you can argue even more of how high of a potential for wrongful conviction there is, right? Take into account that the death row is irreversible in comparison to being in jail, where you can still get justice by certain law societies and funds taking into account the past cases and trying to get you out of jail, or in other ways, appeals, etc., right? Let's just look at the statistics. In the US, 130 people were sentenced to death, having found innocent since 1973 and released from death row. So 130 people is a very high number. But even if the proposition tried to argue that now we have better technologies and better systems, it's still not enough, right? You still have a potential for incomplete or misleading evidence of someone trying to frame another person, right? The reliance on physical evidence alone can be misleading. Certain types of evidence, such as eyewitness testimonies, can be unreliable and subject to memory distortions. And the absence of scientific evidence does not imply a person's guilt or innocence. Or even if the proposition tried to say that for death row, we'll have only the certain evidence, only scientific, only DNA testing, etc., you can still say that there is still a possibility of the human error in using this technology, because this technology can only be 100% certain when it's going according to all the protocols, and the complex data that is interpreted from it is interpreted in a very objective way, which is not 100% possible, right? And lastly, there are problems with the criminal justice system in itself. It's a complex framework that is influenced by numerous variables such as resources, public pressure, and just human biases. And one of the groups that will suffer the most are those underrepresented minorities who are very likely to be subject to racism, or they have very little resources to be able to fund their own legal defense, etc., etc. So in the current legal system, anywhere in the world, including the most developed countries, you have overburdened public defenders who have like a few minutes to half an hour to spend on each case that they're taken. So the legal representation is very inadequate. And even with less significant cases, right, with, for example, for this debate, let's say civil cases are less significant than the criminal ones because they don't necessarily deal with human lives. You can still argue that so many judges may make mistakes, and because of all those factors, we believe that the death row should not be made or re-implemented.
So I don't think anyone really arguing for the proposition would say that that we should be lax in our examining of whether someone is guilty or innocent. We need to have a thorough system, much like the opposition argued in regards to the implementation of other punishments as well. Of course, there is the very, very small chance that someone convicted of a heinous crime, I'm talking about the most extreme crimes you could imagine, some that are beyond the realms of human morality and decency. I'm talking about the Jeffrey Dahmers of the world, those who have mountains of evidence and it's certain that they have committed these crimes. These people we know have done wrong and they don't deserve to live. I mean, within this debate, you have this scale of the types of crimes you could say are worth the death penalty. But truly, if you believe any of these crimes are worth the death penalty, you must be on the side of the proposition. I mean, if we're talking about whether Jeffrey Dahmer should have been killed or not, I mean that's ridiculous. Of course he should have, and thank God he was. Unfortunately, it wasn't via the state; it was via a prison riot, a somewhat self-induced, arguably, but that was deserved. He deserved to die, and the victims' families were better for it. They wanted this man to die. They wanted him to go under the most severe punishment possible because he was evil. He was a demon, and he needed to be cut out. And thank God he was. See, I feel like the opposition is going to struggle to say that those individuals who are certain and thoroughly investigated, confirmed and convicted criminals should not die. And in the case of El Salvador, they had very clear evidence that these people were a part of these gangs, mainly because they marched around saying they were because they were so damn proud, and they had all this gang imagery all over them. I mean, these are the exact same case. These are known guilty men, and no one could argue otherwise. Of course we need a thorough judicial system. No one's disputing that. And we want to be certain that these individuals deserve and are convicted and punished for the actual crimes that they have actually committed. And that is of the utmost importance. Of course, there are these criminals that are certain, and that is what's important. Of course, other forms of punishment are important, and that's something that the opposition mentioned. And I agree. I mean, people who rob a bank, for example, they shouldn't be subject to the death penalty. They should be subjected to an extenuous prison sentence. These other forms of criminal justice are still important. The opposition also mentioned restorative justice, although restorative justice only tends to be used in regards to alongside a sentence or possibly minor crimes.